Hey guys, it's Vince at Third and Long. Hit that like button and subscribe below for everything college football this coming season. Main thing we're going to be talking about today is the potential collapse of the ACC. We know there's been a lot of changes going on around college football. Basically, the last 2 weeks, there's been teams jumping from different conferences. There's been conferences getting dissolved. But mainly, we are going to be looking at some of the changes that might be coming around to the ACC. So we know what happened in the last few weeks, just to kind of recap. So the Pac-12 as a legitimate conference, that pretty much has ceased to exist. They are pretty much completely done. We know that obviously USC and UCLA, they put in to leave the conference last year, so they're going to be joining the conference in 2024. They've now been joined by the University of Washington and Oregon. So they're all jumping ship out of the Pac-12, going over to the Big Ten. We saw the Big 12 kind of stepped in from that point. They picked up Arizona, they picked up Arizona State, they picked up Colorado, they picked up Utah. So they had some pretty good pickups there, pretty much just picking the Pac-12 dry. So really, we had the Pac-12 last year. Now we basically have the Pac-4, because the only teams that are left, you have Cal, you have Washington State, you have Oregon State, and you have Stanford. That's basically as of right now. So pretty much the Pac-12 is a dead man walking. There's not much going on. There's only 4 teams left. They don't know where they're going. They have no home. And it's kind of a sad day for college football because, the Pac-12 has been a pretty storied conference, but at this point, it's history, so it's pretty much over. So we know that we have, as of recently right now, we have Notre Dame has been really pushing the ACC to kind of step in and add Cal and Stanford to the ACC. Why? No one really knows. It doesn't really make any sense at all. From what I'm guessing that it's probably the academics. Both schools are pretty elite universities. I'd say Stanford's probably one of the top colleges in the whole country. So that makes sense. Obviously, they're not really good programs football-wise at all. Cal's had some pretty decent quarterbacks that have gone there. Obviously, you have Goff, you have Rodgers, and that's pretty much it. Pretty much since Goff left, the school's been pretty much garbage football-wise. Stanford is elite as an overall sports program. I'm pretty sure that they're ranked right now as the 3rd overall sports program. If you watch the Olympics, it's loaded with Stanford alum. So they're pretty much good at every sport except the sports that matter, basketball and football when it comes to college. All of these realignment is basically due to football TV money. Cal's horrible at football. Stanford, since McCaffrey left, they've been horrible at football. Shaw did not work out. They're not a good program. They don't really recruit well. So not really bringing anything to the ACC. So I don't see why Notre Dame has been pushing so hard to get them in. Especially, what is Notre Dame petitioning for? They don't even play football in the ACC. They are in the ACC for all sports except football. So I don't even know why they have a seat at the table, really. It doesn't make any sense at all, especially since Notre Dame is probably going to be completely leaving the ACC at some point anyways. But they're telling them that they need to add these other teams, but they're not joining themselves. So really, that doesn't make sense. But that's basically what's going on with the ACC right now. So we know that recently, when Notre Dame put this up to get voted on, it was voted on by the 15 members. When I say 15 members, that's including Notre Dame, because I remember for all sports except football. And basically 4 of the 15 did not vote in favor to add Cal and Stanford. And they need, due to their contracts, they need 12 of the 15, so 75% of the conference to vote yay for them to be able to extend an invitation to another school and try to get them added to the conference. Now, the 4 who voted against adding Stanford and Cal, that 4 is Clemson, FSU, UNC, and NC State. I honestly think there's more, but I think they voted in favor in the meantime because they knew that the proposition wasn't going to pass. So it really didn't matter what they said, it wasn't going to pass. Now, I think if they suspected that their vote actually counted, that they would have not voted in favor. So I think there's more than that 4. It's just they knew that they could get away with not causing any issues right now. Now, the teams that I'm thinking about that have a big enough brand to where they would not be okay with the ACC letting in really bad teams to the conference and basically watering the conference down. When I say that, I personally suspect it's Virginia Tech, UNC, basically anyone who has a pretty stable program and has a pretty storied program. I don't think that they'd be okay with that. So with those 4, and then you add in and Virginia Tech, the pretty storied programs, maybe Pitt and stuff like that. Now, we know that FSU and Clemson, they've all been publicly exploring options to get out of the ACC. Well, why? Because of the grant of rights. That TV deal that they all signed with ESPN, it's awful. They're only getting about $30 million per year that runs through 2036. So these teams are locked in for 13 more years. getting less than half of what the Big Ten and the SEC are getting. So the SEC has a massive contract with ESPN. The Big Ten has a massive contract with Fox Sports. They're making a lot more than the ACC is. So it's really just drying these schools dry because they're not getting the type of funding that the other colleges are getting. So Clemson and FSU have been the most vocal of trying to find ways to get out from the contract. Now, there's other big teams that have big markets besides Clemson and FSU. I think like Miami, very populated market, very storied program. So if Clemson and FSU could find a way to get out of it, then I think that other schools would then follow up. But the buyout right now, it's $120 million per school. That's massive. It'd be the biggest buyout that I've ever heard of. And that'd be a lot of money for schools to have to pay. Even if they're making more by joining another conference, that's a huge payout. Now, I know FSU did recently. They just hired JP Morgan Chase to basically try to look into ways to come up with capital, to see if there's any way that they could raise the funds through some public offerings or doing something to come up with $120 million. Or maybe at least come to a contractual buyout for less, but they're looking into different ways to do that. Could just be a lot of smoke there, but they're definitely looking into it, and they're making it known. So they could also just be trying to leverage their weight to see if ESPN or the ACC might change the contract for schools with bigger markets and bigger crowds, and maybe see if they can get more, maybe up to $40 million. It's still a lot less than the other conferences, but it might buy the ACC some more time. How much time? I don't know. But basically, what we're going to be focusing on is if the ACC collapses somehow, where are these ACC schools going to go? What conferences do they legitimately fit in? Do they even have a conference? Because I think if FSU gets out, Clemson's going to follow. They'll be right behind them. Now, those are two foundational schools of the conference. So I think if they leave, that starts the dominoes. Everyone's going to start leaving. Anyone that has a brand. I'm talking Virginia Tech, Miami, UNC, Duke, Pitt. They're gone. They're not going to stick around. This is not the Big Ten when they lost Texas and Oklahoma. This is a bigger deal because the Big Ten was able to rebound and add some decent teams. All those teams have been snatched up by this point. The ACC can't add anyone else to replace those teams. So those other teams for themselves, they'd also have to jump ship. But FSU would also be kind of showing the way to how to get out of the contract. So everyone else is going to exploit that. It's like when USC first left the Pac-12 to go to the Big Ten, and UCLA followed with them. That set the dominoes. That basically was the death of the Pac-12 right there, was them just even getting that process started. That's what it would be like if Clemson and FSU leave. It'll just be a matter of time. Just like the whole Big 12 died, the ACC would be over. So pretty much the first team that we're going to look at here. So let's say the ACC dissolves, whether it's this year, next year, if there's a decent probability that it might happen. So where do these teams go? You have Boston College comes out. Boston College, they're not good at football. They're not really good at basketball. They're okay, nothing special. Football's what's generating revenue, what's generating realignment. They don't fit in anywhere. I think they would go to the American Athletic Conference, the AAC, just because it's another okay brand for them to add. It gives them a little more TV options. They really don't fit in anywhere. They're not good enough for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, no. So they're going to end up in the American Athletic Conference. It's really the only place for them to fall. Clemson, I think the SEC is a natural fit. This is one of the top 4 college football programs of the last 10 years. They've won 2 national championships in the last 8 years. They've played for 4. So that shows you where they are. This is a top 4 program for any conference to get them is a steal. I think the SEC is the best fit. It's a Southern school. They have a natural rivalry there with South Carolina, so that makes sense, and it's an elite program. They're decent at basketball, but we know football is where it's at. Perfect fit for the SEC. Duke, I think, perfect fit for the Big Ten. The reason I say they're a perfect fit for the Big Ten is they have elite academics. The Big Ten is a great sports conference, but like the Pac-12 kind of was, it has higher academics than some of the other conferences. So it checks that box off. I mean, it's one of the best basketball programs ever. I'd say a top 5 basketball program of all time. So it checks that off. And, they're okay at football, nothing special, but it's a good brand. They have good academics. They have great basketball. So I think they'd go to the Big Ten. FSU, I think they'd go to the SEC. I know there's a lot of talk that they're flirting with the Big Ten and whatnot. I don't buy it. I think the Big Ten would like to get a Florida school in, but the SEC lost the West Coast. The Big Ten took the West Coast when they took those big Pac-12 teams, and pretty much Fox Sports owns the West Coast right now and the middle of the country through their contract with the Big Ten. I don't think the SEC is happy about that. I don't think ESPN's happy. They don't get to broadcast those games. So I think they'd be pushing big time to keep Florida State in the SEC, keep it under contract with ESPN. Don't let it go to the Big Ten and with Fox Sports. They have a natural rivalry with UF. Florida State's good at basketball. They have a very storied football program, and they're on the upswing right now. So they're elite at football, natural rivalry with Florida, and it keeps the Florida footprint in the SEC and out of the Big Ten. Georgia Tech, they really don't fit in anywhere to me. To me, they're not really good at anything. They're good at academics. That's about it. Basketball, no. Football, no. So really, what do they bring? They get left out to me. They're just not worth the Big Ten bringing them in and giving them 60 to 70 million per year. For what? They don't bring anything. So I would say if they're going anywhere, they're going to the American Athletic Conference, just because it gives them another known, marketable team to add a little legitimacy to their conference. But that's about it. They're not going anywhere else. Louisville. Great basketball history, decent football. They were good with Lamar Jackson, but mainly a basketball history. I think they're naturally going to go to the Big 12. Some people might say Big 10, but I don't think so. I think the Big 12 is a natural fit. They can have a rivalry with Cincinnati, with West Virginia, so it makes sense for the Big 12 to try to keep expanding eastward, because they added those teams, and those teams, Cincinnati and West Virginia, they don't make any sense. UCF doesn't make any sense, so they have to expand their market, get more of an eastern footprint, keep pushing that way, and it's going to build a natural rivalry with Cincinnati, a natural rivalry with West Virginia, so it makes sense for the Big 12 to add them. Plus, they're getting a really good basketball school, and the Big 12 is still really good at basketball, even with losing Texas and Oklahoma. Next, UM. A lot of people would say SEC. I'm thinking straight up Big 10. UM's private school, small school, they have great academics, great at basketball. They just made the Final Four. Basketball program's looking good. Elite football history. While not doing well right now, it's one of the most storied and one of the biggest college football brands ever. So elite pedigree there. Foothold in South Florida. The Big Ten has no teams in Florida. They want a foothold in Florida. Miami is a natural fit. They're not going to go with FSU. FSU is going to the SEC. So how does the Big Ten strike back? They take Miami. They take South Florida, the best recruiting ground in the country. They want that. Miami has a natural rivalry with Ohio State. Notre Dame, they're going to be in the Big Ten eventually. Miami has a natural rivalry with them. It makes sense. Everything lines up perfectly there. Next, UNC. Big Ten, everyone knows it. Elite basketball, elite academics, pretty good at football. They've been good since Mac Brown came back. It's a top 5 basketball program of all time. I think they're going with Duke as a package. Just like UCF and UCLA went together, I think both of those schools, no matter where they go. But the Big Ten, when they add Miami, they're going to need a couple more Southern teams to cement a Southern foothold. They're going to bring in UNC. Perfect fit. Next, NC State. Big 12. They're not going to the Big Ten. The Big Ten can't take every North Carolina school, so they're going to the Big 12. It makes sense. They're okay at football, okay at basketball. They're really not necessarily good at anything. But again, the Big 12 needs to keep expanding eastward to make sense for the teams that they've recently added. So they're going to grab up NC State. They want that Southeast football print, and they added UCF. So they need more teams in the Southeast. It only makes sense. Next, Big Ten. So, like I was saying, Notre Dame, hands down, going to the Big Ten. It was always going to happen. It is always happened. They're good at basketball, elite football program, elite academics. They have a bunch of natural rivalries that are already in the Big Ten. They have a rivalry with USC. They have a rivalry with Penn State. They have a rivalry with Ohio State. UM will be in the Big Ten. They have a natural rivalry with them. It's a match made in heaven. This is probably the best fit is for Notre Dame. They're already located close enough there. Perfect location, perfect rivalries on all coasts throughout the country for all different time zones. And, if Stanford does end up joining the Big Ten, they have a rivalry with Stanford too. So it just makes a lot of sense for them to be there. Next is Pitt. I really wanted to say the Big Ten for Pitt, but they've added so many schools that, they just can't keep adding that many. They're not going to be a conference of 40 teams. So to me, they go to the Big 12. The Big 12 wants some schools more centrally located to Cincinnati and to West Virginia. They're adding Louisville, so now they're going to add in Pitt. Gives them a school closer to West Virginia to kind of build up a rivalry with, so it cements that eastern wing. They're good at football, and they're okay. A good addition for the Big 12. Next, Syracuse. Syracuse, they really have nowhere to go. They're not good at football, elite basketball pedigree, but I think they're going to the American Athletic Conference. I thought about the Big 12. I thought about the Big 10. Big 10's added too many. Really doesn't make too much sense for the Big 12 to go into the state of New York. So due to their basketball program, I think that they'll still get into the American Athletic Conference. They're great at basketball. Football's garbage. The Big 10 doesn't need the market. So that's just kind of where they fall. Virginia, Big 10. So while the AAC kind of makes some sense, the SEC maybe makes a little sense too. They're not necessarily good at football. They're just an average to below average team, but they did win the national championship in basketball back in 2019. So I think that basketball program and the Big Ten wanting to cement a Southern wing, it's going to push them into the Big Ten. It's a good footprint. It's a decent label for the school, so I think they get into the Big Ten. Virginia Tech, another one that goes to the Big Ten. Now, this is a package deal with Virginia. Just like UNC and Duke, I think Virginia Tech follows Virginia into the Big Ten, cements that Southern foothold for the Big Ten. They have a great football pedigree back to the Vic years, so the Big Ten's adding them. They're adding UNC, Duke, Virginia, Miami, Notre Dame. This creates a strong Big Ten South. The Big Ten would become probably the best basketball conference in the country, hands down. And they would be strengthening their case to challenge the SEC as the best football conference. They'd come out as big winners, but so does the SEC because they had a Clemson, they had a Florida State. That's a big deal. Last but not least, Wake Forest. I think they're probably going to the Big 12. The Big Ten's added too many North Carolina schools, so they're going to end up at the Big 12. Not a good fit for the SEC, not good at football, not good at basketball, not a good fit for the AAC. So kind of by default, it goes to the Big 12. Again, because they're expanding eastward. They need the natural things to line up. UCF, Pitt, Louisville, West Virginia, Cincinnati. Now they add Wake Forest, so they've grown east, and they can probably stop at that point. So that's kind of what I think, or where I think these ACC schools would go. That's if the ACC collapses. It's probably like a 50-50 chance right now. But if Florida State gets a way out, Clemson follows, it's over. Just like when USC and UCLA left, that pretty much sets things in motion, and that's where I think these schools would go. Anyways, drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree, or if you think they might go somewhere else, or if you think that the ACC is going to stay together and that Florida State's just kind of full of it, and they're just basically trying to play their hand and see if they can get some more money. Hit the like button, subscribe. We're going to be touching on everything college football this year, and we also got the schedules. We're going to be going over all of the schedules and trying to see who we think is going to win Week 1. Thank you for following. This is Vince with Third and Long.